Before you hear how this night unfolded, understand this: some moments don't announce themselves with sirens or screams. They arrive quietly, wearing the disguise of an ordinary evening, and by the time you realize what's happening, a single choice has already split your life in two. If you believe that courage can come from the smallest voices and that doing the right thing still matters in a world that often looks away, take a second to like this story and subscribe for more like it. Because what began as a simple dinner between a father and his daughter would become something none of us could walk away from unchanged. I was sitting 3 booths away when it happened, close enough to smell burnt coffee and fryer oil, far enough to pretend I wasn't watching. And even now I can't say for sure what made me notice the man and his little girl before everything went wrong. Maybe it was how he sat slightly angled toward her, one arm resting along the back of the booth like a shield, or the way the girl kept swinging her legs and talking with her whole face, as if the world hadn't taught her caution yet. The diner itself was the kind of place you forget 5 minutes after leaving. Cracked vinyl seats, a flickering neon sign in the window, a bell over the door that rang too loud every time someone came or went. Outside, the highway hummed with passing trucks, the sound bleeding into the room like distant thunder. Inside, the man, Ethan, I would later learn, looked exhausted in the bone-deep way you only see in people carrying more than they can afford to put down. His jacket was worn at the cuffs, his hands rough, knuckles scarred not from bar fights but from work, and across from him sat his daughter, Lily, maybe 6 years old, clutching a red crayon and a kid's menu she'd already drawn all over, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail that kept slipping loose. They were sharing a plate of fries, counting them out like it was a game, and for a few minutes the world felt harmless. Then the door opened, and 3 men walked in together, 2 together. They scanned the room instead of looking for a table, their eyes moving in short, sharp sweeps that didn't match the lazy pace of the diner. I noticed because I've learned to notice things like that, but Ethan didn't look up at first, too busy listening as Lily leaned close and whispered something that made him smile tiredly. The men slid into the booth behind a woman sitting alone near the window, a woman in her late 20s or early 30s, dressed too neatly for a place like this, her phone face down beside her coffee. At first, it looked like coincidence. Then one of them leaned too close. Another shifted to block the aisle. The third sat sideways, his back to the room, creating a wall. The woman stiffened. You could see it in her shoulders, the way her spine went rigid like she'd just realized she was trapped in a dream she couldn't wake up from. I told myself it was none of my business. Most people did. Plates clinked. Someone laughed too loudly near the counter. The waitress kept refilling coffee like she didn't see a thing. But the little girl did. Lily stopped swinging her legs. She leaned across the table, her small face serious in a way that didn't belong on a child, and tugged on her father's sleeve. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw Ethan's expression change, the smile fading, replaced by that tight look parents get when they're trying to decide whether to believe their kid or dismiss a fear to keep the world simple. He glanced toward the booth by the window, just a quick look, and then back at Lily, shaking his head slightly like he was about to reassure her. That's when one of the men reached under the table and grabbed the woman's wrist. It wasn't violent. It was worse than that. Casual, possessive, like he already owned the outcome. The woman tried to pull away, her coffee sloshing dangerously close to the edge, her mouth opening as if to speak, and then closing again when the man smiled at her, slow and confident. Lily saw it. Her eyes went wide, and she stood up on the seat, pointing without realizing she was doing it, her voice cutting through the low diner noise like a blade. "Daddy," she said, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for the man to hear, loud enough to shatter the lie we were all telling ourselves: she's in danger. The room seemed to inhale all at once. Ethan froze for half a second, the kind of pause that holds a lifetime of calculation. I could almost see the thoughts racing through his head, his daughter, his past, the way one bad move could cost him everything. He gently pushed Lily back onto the seat, his voice low, telling her to stay put, to finish her fries, but his eyes never left that booth. One of the men glanced over, annoyed, his gaze lingering on Ethan a second too long. That was the moment the line was crossed. Ethan stood. Chair scraped. The bell over the door rang as someone left, oblivious. Ethan didn't shout. He didn't posture. He walked over like a man going to pay his bill, calm and unhurried, until he was close enough that the men finally looked up at him fully. "Let her go," he said, his voice steady but carrying something underneath it that made even me sit straighter. The man holding the woman laughed, a short, ugly sound, and tightened his grip instead. Everything after that happened faster than I can properly explain, like time had decided to skip ahead. Ethan grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it with a force that sent coffee, plates, and curses flying. The woman scrambled back, knocking her chair over. One man lunged, and Ethan met him halfway, slamming his shoulder into the guy's chest and driving him into the counter with a crack that echoed through the diner. Another swung wildly, and Ethan caught his wrist, twisting just enough to make the man howl and drop whatever he'd been reaching for. The third man tried to circle behind him, but Ethan kicked a chair back without looking, catching the guy in the knees and sending him sprawling. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't heroic in the way movies make it look. It was raw, desperate, efficient, like a man who knew exactly how much damage he needed to do and no more. The entire thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then the men were either on the floor or running for the door, the bell ringing frantically as one of them fled into the night. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The woman stood shaking near the window, her hands trembling so badly she had to clench them into fists. Ethan backed away, palms open, breathing hard, his eyes already searching for Lily. She was still in the booth, frozen, tears streaking down her face, but watching him like he'd just stepped out of a story she didn't fully understand yet. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called it in. People started talking all at once, the spell breaking, and I remember thinking, as I watched Ethan walk back to his daughter and kneel in front of her, pulling her into a hug, she returned with fierce urgency, that whatever happened next, police, questions, consequences, this night had already chosen him. And none of us in that diner would ever forget the moment a little girl refused to look away and made a man stand up when the rest of us stayed seated. By morning, the diner felt like a rumor that had already started changing shape, but the consequences of that night hadn't waited for daylight, and neither had the fear. I know this because I saw Ethan again less than 12 hours later, standing in the parking lot outside the same motel where half the diner staff lived, his phone pressed to his ear, his daughter tucked behind his leg like a shadow that refused to detach. Police lights weren't flashing anymore, but their absence felt louder, like the pause before another impact. After the fight, the officers had taken statements, asked careful questions, and run Ethan's name through a system that remembers better than it forgives. They let him go eventually, but not before one of them gave him a look that said this wasn't over, not even close. The woman from the diner had left in an unmarked car, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale, but her eyes sharp, the kind of eyes that never stop calculating even when fear is trying to drown them. What most people didn't see, what I only pieced together later, was how quickly the night followed Ethan home. His phone started ringing just after midnight. Unknown number. He didn't answer at first. Then a text came through. "We saw your kid." That was all it said. No threats, no explanation, just enough to make his blood turn cold. He packed a bag without telling Lily why, hands shaking despite how hard he tried to hide it, and drove until the gas light came on, circling back to the motel because there was nowhere else to go. By morning, the second message arrived. "You should have stayed out of it." Lily noticed before he could stop her, reading his face the way children read weather. She asked if they were in trouble. Ethan lied, badly, and said everything was fine. But children know. They always know. That afternoon, 2 men in suits found him. They didn't knock hard, didn't threaten, didn't even raise their voices. They showed badges just long enough to register and asked if they could talk somewhere private. Lily sat on the bed coloring while they spoke near the door, and I swear I've never seen a man fight so hard to keep his body between strangers and his child without moving an inch. That's when the truth started coming out. The woman from the diner wasn't just passing through. She was a federal prosecutor working quietly on a case involving a trafficking pipeline that used roadside diners and motels exactly like that one. Places people don't look too closely, places fear blends in with fatigue. The 3 men Ethan fought weren't nobodies. They were low-level enforcers who'd panicked when the woman resisted and things got public. Ethan's intervention had saved her, yes, but it had also exposed them. Now the people above them wanted to make sure the exposure stopped with him. The agents didn't sugarcoat it. Ethan was a civilian. A single father. Someone with a past that made him easy to discredit and easier to scare. They could offer protection, but protection came with strings, statements, testimony, cooperation that would drag this out for months, maybe longer. When they left, the room felt smaller. Lily put down her crayon and asked the question Ethan had been dreading. Are the scary men mad at you? He didn't answer right away. He sat on the edge of the bed, ran a hand through his hair, and nodded once. But you helped her, Lily said, confused, like the math didn't add up. Helping people isn't bad. That was the moment I knew he was going to say yes to the agents, no matter the cost. Because he looked at his daughter like she was a mirror he couldn't lie to without breaking something permanent. Over the next few days, things escalated in quiet, suffocating ways. A truck followed him too closely on the road and peeled off at the last second. Someone asked Lily her name outside a grocery store, smiling too wide, leaving before Ethan could confront them. A note appeared under their motel door, handwritten this time. Last warning. The agents moved faster after that. Safe houses were discussed. Lily asked why they couldn't go to the park anymore. Ethan stopped sleeping. Through it all, the woman from the diner finally reached out directly. She came alone, no suit, no badge, just a tired face and a gratitude that looked heavier than relief. She told him what he'd stopped that night. Not just an assault, but a disappearance that would have vanished into statistics and silence. She told him she wouldn't force him to help, but she couldn't pretend his testimony didn't matter. Ethan listened without interrupting, arms crossed. Lily sitting between them on the bed, swinging her feet. When the woman finished, Lily looked up at her and then at her father. If you don't help, she said softly, they'll do it again to someone else. No one corrected her, because she was right. Ethan agreed that night. And with that choice, the quiet life he'd been clinging to officially ended. The next morning, they were moved under protection, their names scrubbed from motel logs, their routines erased. Ethan gave statements until his throat went raw, reliving every second of the diner fight, every decision that led him there. Lily drew pictures of the diner over and over, crossing out the bad men with thick red lines. Somewhere between court dates being scheduled and evidence being secured, Ethan realized the fear hadn't gone away, but it had changed. It wasn't just fear for himself anymore. It was fear sharpened into purpose. And as the case grew bigger, louder, impossible to bury, one truth became unavoidable. The night Lily said she's in danger hadn't just saved one woman. It had pulled a thread that was unraveling something much darker, and the people responsible were not done fighting back. The trial began on a Monday that felt too clean for what it carried, sunlight pouring through courthouse windows as if nothing ugly had ever happened in that building. And by then Ethan looked like a man who'd aged years in weeks. Leaner, sharper, the softness burned away by constant vigilance. While Lily held his hand with the same quiet authority, she discovered the night everything changed. I sat in the back again, where witnesses become shadows, and watched as the woman from the diner took the stand first, her voice steady as she laid out a pattern that turned 3 men into a system and 1 diner into a hunting ground. Then it was Ethan's turn. He walked to the witness box without looking at the gallery, shoulders squared, jaw set, answering questions with the precision of someone who knows that clarity is the only armor left. He described the booth by the window, the blocked aisle, the grip on the woman's wrist. He described his daughter standing on the seat, pointing. When the defense tried to paint him as reckless, as a man with a history of violence itching for an excuse, Ethan didn't flinch. He simply said, I stood up because my daughter asked me to. The courtroom went still in that way that tells you something landed. Lily watched him from the front row, feet not touching the floor, eyes never leaving his face, as if she were making sure he didn't disappear. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. Guilty. Conspiracy, coercion, trafficking-related charges that stacked like bricks. The men who had laughed in the diner were suddenly smaller, shoulders caved in under the weight of what they'd tried to normalize. Outside, cameras waited, hungry, but Ethan kept walking, Lily's hand in his, head down. He didn't give statements. He didn't give speeches. He just breathed like a man learning how again. The aftermath unfolded in quieter ways. The threat stopped. The agents shook his hand and told him he'd done something rare. Paperwork arrived that erased old marks from his record, self-defense recognized, cooperation noted. One envelope, thinner than the rest, how the letter Lily read aloud at the kitchen table of the small apartment they'd been placed in. Temporary at first, then permanent when the dust settled. Child Protective Services. Case closed. No further action. Lily beamed like she'd just won a medal. Ethan closed his eyes and let the chair take his weight. Weeks later, the woman from the diner visited one last time, not with suits or agents, but with coffee and an offer that wasn't charity. She was starting a foundation tied to the case's fallout, resources for victims, training for businesses along the highways, a hotline staffed by people who knew how predators hid in plain sight. She wanted Ethan to help design safety training, not because he was strong, but because he listened, because he noticed when a child pointed. Ethan said he'd think about it. Lily didn't wait. "He'll do it," she said matter of fact. And he did. The diner reopened under new ownership a month later, brighter lights, mirrors angled toward corners, a sign by the door that said "See something? Say something," letters drawn by kids from the local school. On opening night, Ethan and Lily sat in the same booth. Fries again. The waitress brought extra ketchup without asking. Lily swung her legs and smiled at strangers like the world had given something back. I watched them from my table, thinking about how stories like this rarely end with parades. They end with routines rebuilt, with small choices made daily to stay brave. Ethan still checked mirrors. Lily still asked questions. But when a woman came in alone and 3 men didn't follow, when laughter sounded easy instead of forced, when a bell rang and no one flinched, it felt like a win you don't see on the news. As they paid and stood to leave, Lily tugged Ethan's sleeve, pointing to the window where the neon buzzed steady and safe. "Daddy," she said, grinning, "today feels good." Ethan nodded, eyes wet, and for the first time since that night, he smiled without looking over his shoulder. And as they walked out together, I understood something simple and heavy at once. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it taps a sleeve and asks you to stand.